All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a substance with a massive 3,000-year-old history. Indigenous Maya and Aztec practitioners actually built entire ceremonial systems around Theobroma cacao, which literally translates to the food of the gods. And for centuries, practitioners have described its effects as this incredibly warming sensation spreading from the chest, a softening of emotional armor, and just a profound openness to connection. Now, I know that sounds deeply mystical, right? Well, today we're going to dive straight into the hard science behind all that mysticism. We are translating ancient traditions into modern pharmacology. So, what is the actual molecule responsible for this whole ceremonial cacao experience? I bet most people would immediately guess caffeine. I mean, it's chocolate, right? But I want to go ahead and debunk that myth right out of the gate. While cacao definitely does contain caffeine, it's strictly a secondary alkaloid. In a ceremonial-grade paste, caffeine is basically just hanging out in the background. It's present at roughly 1/10 the concentration of its much more abundant sibling. The true driver of the cacao experience is something categorically different.
When you compare the chemistry of these two molecules side by side, it is fascinating. You've got caffeine, which is 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, and then you have theobromine, which is 3,7-dimethylxanthine. They look incredibly similar. They even share the exact same bicyclic purine scaffold. But if you look really closely at theobromine, it's crucially missing a methyl group at position 1. And wow, that single tiny missing methyl group changes its entire pharmacological profile. Because it lacks that specific group, theobromine doesn't act as a strict central nervous system stimulant like caffeine does. Instead, it operates primarily as a cardiovascular compound.
Okay, moving into section 1, the engine of vasodilation, or why this is a literal heart opening. To really understand how theobromine acts on your cardiovascular system, we first need to talk about phosphodiesterases, or PDEs for short. Think of PDEs as the cellular cleanup crew. They're a family of enzymes whose main job is to break down intracellular signals, specifically cyclic nucleotides like cyclic GMP, which are what control smooth muscle relaxation. Now, theobromine comes in and acts as a non-selective PDE inhibitor. Basically, it blocks these cleanup enzymes, specifically interacting with PD4 and PD5. And when PD5 gets inhibited, that cyclic GMP is no longer being broken down. It just starts accumulating right there in your vascular smooth muscle cells. And because of that massive accumulation of cyclic GMP, protein kinase G gets activated, and the muscle fibers in your blood vessel walls literally relax. Your blood vessels dilate. Blood flow increases throughout the entire body, peripheral vascular resistance goes down, and, crucially, blood flows heavily through the coronary arteries supplying the heart itself. So here's the absolute coolest takeaway. When practitioners talk about a heart opening during a cacao ceremony, it is not a metaphor. It's a literal, physiological, vascular event driven entirely by theobromine.
Which brings us to section 2, alertness without the crash, and taking a look at the pharmacological curve.
Listen, if you've ever had a strong cup of coffee, you know the jitters. So why on earth doesn't cacao give you that awful crash? Well, let's contrast how these two molecules handle fatigue. Fatigue happens when a molecule called adenosine builds up in your brain. Caffeine works by aggressively blocking A1 and A2A receptors. It's a really harsh blockade, and it triggers your sympathetic nervous system, spiking your heart rate variability, releasing cortisol, and basically causing anxiety. Theobromine, on the other hand, is a weak adenosine blocker. We're talking 5 to 10 times less potent than caffeine. Because of this gentle approach, it provides a lifting of fatigue, a kind of calm energy, and a gentle sharpening of attention, entirely without triggering that anxious fight-or-flight cortisol spike.
And then there is this totally surprising fact. Theobromine has an elimination half-life of 6 to 10 hours in healthy adults. To put that into perspective, that's roughly double the half-life of caffeine. So instead of the aggressive spike and miserable crash you get from your morning coffee, theobromine gives you this broad, flat pharmacokinetic curve. It rises slowly to a really modest peak, and then it declines gradually over many, many hours. It's just a remarkably smooth ride. And this is exactly why a cacao experience feels increasingly nourishing and sustained as time goes on, rather than leaving you feeling totally depleted. All right, on to section 3, cacao's bliss molecules and the entourage effect. You see, cacao is not just a single variable equation. It is a highly complex matrix of synergistic compounds working together. First up, let's look at anandamide.
Anandamide is literally known as the brain's endogenous bliss molecule. It's a lipid neurotransmitter that acts as a partial agonist at CB1 cannabinoid receptors. Yep, those are the exact same receptors involved in mood elevation, reduced anxiety, and that profound sense of flow and emotional openness. And incredibly, cacao naturally contains anandamide right within its own chemical matrix. But here's the catch. Just having these molecules isn't enough. You need the entire matrix. I honestly love thinking about this biological sequence like a heist movie. You have phenylethylamine, or PEA, which stimulates dopamine release and acts as the payload of brief, intense euphoria. But if you just consume PEA on its own, the security guards in your gut, an enzyme called MAOB, will completely destroy it before it ever reaches your brain. Enter the MAO inhibitors, naturally found in cacao. They act as the muscle, blocking those gut enzymes so the PEA can safely cross into the bloodstream. At the exact same time, cacao also contains FAA inhibitors, which run interference to protect the anandamide from being broken down. The synergy is just perfect. Theobromine opens the heart physically, while PEA and anandamide, protected by their trusty inhibitor sidekicks, work together to elevate your mood and drop that emotional armoring.
Now for Section 4, Why Dose Matters and the Cacao Psilocybin Stack.
Let's shift our focus to practical application for a minute. How do all these biological mechanisms actually scale with dosage? Well, 2.5 grams. I really want to drop this massive number here because it represents the absolute maximum theobromine content found in 100 grams of high-quality, unroasted, unfermented ceremonial paste. To frame that for you, that is up to 15 times stronger than the theobromine concentration you'd get from just casually snacking on standard commercial dark chocolate. To understand why that gap is so huge, let's break down the dosing. A standard 30-gram commercial dark chocolate bar is going to give you maybe half a gram of theobromine. Barely perceptible effects, honestly. A light ceremonial dose, around 42 grams, pushes you to about 1 gram, which is where you finally hit the pharmacological threshold for those mood and cardiovascular shifts. But a full ceremonial dose of 80 to 100 grams, that delivers between 1.3 and 2.5 grams, and that is where the cardiovascular effects become highly pronounced. The reason for this huge difference is simply processing. The 5 to 7 day fermentation and the high temperature roasting used to make everyday commercial chocolate actually degrade these delicate alkaloids. You literally need a specific, raw, minimally processed ceremonial dose to keep those molecules intact and hit that therapeutic threshold. And hitting that specific threshold is exactly why cacao has been used as a companion medicine for over 3,000 years. Think about the biological sequence of the ancient Mesoamerican psilocybin stock. First, cacao is ingested about 30 to 45 minutes prior. Second, the theobromine kicks in and initiates vasodilation, specifically cerebrovascular dilation, widening the blood vessels in the brain and increasing cerebral blood flow. Third, the psilocybin is ingested. And fourth, because the brain is currently receiving all this increased blood flow and lower cerebrovascular resistance, it is perfectly prepped and primed to receive lipophilic compounds way more efficiently across the blood-brain barrier. The synergy between these compounds operates on 3 totally distinct biological pathways. First, you have that PDE5 cerebrovascular dilation we just talked about, which enhances delivery. Second, cacao's MAO inhibition actually slows the breakdown of psilocin in the gut and liver, which subtly extends the bioavailability. And third, the anandamide in cacao elevates CB1 receptor activity, which crosstalks to modulate and sensitize the very 5-HT2A cortical neurons that psilocin targets. So rather than just recklessly amplifying the intensity, these 3 specific pathways create an environment of profound physiological warmth and receptivity. They biochemically set the stage for you to approach the experience with total openness, rather than fear or defensiveness. Which brings us just perfectly to this quote from the 19th century botanical writer Albert Henfrey. He noted that indigenous peoples described cacao medicinally as a remedy for sadness that, quote, opens the heart to joy. Obviously, they didn't have microscopes back then to look at PDE5 inhibition or FAH inhibitors, right? But phenomenologically, they knew exactly what it did. Today, the laboratory simply gives us the precision to understand why it works. We can actually see the cardiovascular events, the molecular synergy, and the precise dose thresholds. It really makes you wonder, as modern pharmacology continues to map out these insanely complex organic matrices, what other ancient traditions might just be out there, waiting for the laboratory to finally catch up?